"Mom, please don't wear that," I said, knowing that the jacket she was wearing would only draw more attention. You know, the shiny, red, puffy jacket with the faux fur that lines the hood. "It's cold outside. I'm wearing it," she said, giving me a hard stare. My mother never cared about these things, yet I always did. "We'll look fresh off the boat. Fobs," I thought, stressed out by the idea. You can imagine I didn't win the fight. I shut the door behind me, and we left for the grocery store. Surely enough, I felt the stares. The stares my mother and I received because of our small and slanted eyes, our dark hair, my mother's red jacket. "Can you grab me the oranges?" she asked in Cantonese. In a hurry, I responded in English as quickly as I could. "Yes, I can." Though I hadn't even left Vancouver, my home, I felt the need to blend in, hide, and erase my true self to avoid looking like a mere foreigner. The way I was perceived through the lens of others was extremely important to me. Wanting to belong was all I had ever wanted. Who didn't? This mindset caused me to carry very little self-confidence at home and at school on a daily basis. I rejected my cultural and self-identity, feeling like I was lacking in every way possible. Why is it that I felt this way? The question I asked myself over and over again. The Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI, journey is confusing. Living under the model minority myth, we are praised for being hardworking, self-reliant, being good at science and math, and living the American dream. Yet those are our set limitations. AAPI often find themselves at a cultural crossroads, separated from their community, their language, their traditions, their customs, others that look like them, and instead grow up in a society that does not value them or their background. The lack of media representation was evidence. When I noticed my Canadian side being favored by the public, the media, I immediately felt the need to become more westernized, whatever that had meant in my head. I felt the obligation to reject my culture, my heritage, my language, to feel like I belonged somewhere. So I altered my clothing style. I changed my image to fit into the mainstream, but I could not reconstruct my face. I could not erase my small and slanted black eyes and put round blue ones in their place. I could not take my black hair and make it bright and blonde. I could not change my low nose bridge, my flat face, my wide nose, and yet still, I could not help but point out my physical flaws and compare myself to the girl in the magazine. I went to sleep at the end of each day, wishing that all of these things that I hated about myself would suddenly disappear overnight. Then I would wake up the next morning, disappointed and unsatisfied with what I saw in the mirror. What I wished for was simply impossible. I was born between two cultures, and I would have to live this way for the rest of my life. The portrayal of AAPI on the screen has always been very stereotypical, very watered down. There are very few pictures out there where I can actually reflect and see myself as a character in the story. These Asian characters are reduced to their stereotypes of having strict parents, knowing martial arts, owning a dragon, being nerdy, uptight, and overachieving, compliant, docile, and hesitant, which in turn creates a false narrative of the Asian community. Not to say we haven't come a long way, though, because of shows like Tiger Tail, Minari, Parasite, Crazy Rich Asians receiving such high praise. But when I look to the shows that I watched as a child, made 10 years ago or even less, there's either one Asian side character with few lines and no allowance for character development, or simply no Asian character at all. When there was an Asian character, though, they were often casted as multiracial people for the reason that their presence is more digestible for mainstream society. I acknowledge that multiracial Asians also have to deal with this identity crisis, maybe even more so being multiracial. However, this always emphasized how I was too Asian or not white enough to be accepted as my true, authentic self. This only proved how our society valued Eurocentric features over anything else. Not my face, not my sister's face. The media portrayed an idea that in order to be beautiful, you have to have fair skin, bright eyes, and light hair. This felt unfair. Why didn't I look the standard? Why was I born the way I was? The media projected this idea to people of all ethnic backgrounds in passing, despite the fact that it is impossible for somebody like me to get these features on their face without the help of surgery or cosmetics. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? So if I wasn't the standard, what was my place? I was sent into a downward spiral, questioning my cultural identity, who I was, and which country I belonged to. Last summer, I was fortunate to be able to speak with my papa, or my maternal grandmother, about her experiences as a young girl growing up in Myanmar during World War II. It was a sunny day, just her and I talking without anything else to do. Little did I know that this one day would turn me around completely. She tells me the stories of how tigers would roam around her little bamboo house and eat the chickens living in the coop beside her, how her father dug a hole in the backyard, the only place to hide from the Japanese overhead planes. She tells me how her and her 3 sisters fled through the forest for their lives, surviving on solely wild berries and stream water, how her loyal dog followed them until being shot by machine guns, causing her sister's deafness, how her father was slaughtered by the dacoits and thrown into a pit. The sisters relied on each other heavily, separated from their parents without anybody else to look after them. My grandmother eventually made her way over to Hong Kong. Although being of Chinese descent, she struggled to learn the language as she was only capable of speaking Burmese and English, like me. 2 years passed, and finally she was able to pick up the language through working at a hospital as one of the few female anesthesiologists across the entirety of Hong Kong. All these stories about how she got to where she is now. Living in Vancouver with her daughter, son-in-law, their puppy, and her 2 lovely grandchildren. These were the stories she told me. Stories she has collected throughout her life. And with each word, I sense the terror and the agony, the heartache and the sorrow, the passion and the joy. All of a sudden, I felt a tremendous amount of appreciation, gratitude, and admiration fall onto me. I felt indebted to her. To my parents and every individual who came before me, I finally understood what it took for me to be here today. For me to go to an amazing school, grow up in a safe, tight-knit community filled with people who I love. She did not move across the entire world without a reason. She came here for herself, for her family, for me. She was determined to make it. She never gave up. So how could I? The way I looked was all of a sudden a speck of dust. Understanding what my ancestors sacrificed for me to be here today was far more valuable. So from that moment on, I made a promise to myself, to her, to all my past relatives, to never give in or give up. These past few months have been difficult, very difficult, almost as if they were tests to provoke my most vulnerable weaknesses. But I will keep this promise forever. I've been actively trying to work on my self-confidence and inner strength. Me talking to you here today is the proof. Being stuck between 2 cultures is hard, and although it always will be, there's power in accepting and loving yourself in your own skin. Me, I found my way to cope. If you also struggle with this, learning about your heritage may be a great way to start. However, I do understand that not everybody is interested or willing. I also acknowledge that having this type of access to my family history is a privilege that not everybody has. However, if you do get the chance and are set, I truly recommend asking a family member because this experience has been extremely helpful in navigating who I am and who I want to be in the future. if this window of opportunity is not quite so open for you, or you would rather not go into the past, even having a chat with your family members, especially your grandparents while they're still alive, is another great starting point. There is power in celebrating your culture, your heritage, you. No matter who you are, where you're from, your skin color, your beliefs, your differences, your history, your gender identity, you will stand out, but only because you do not need to fit in. As cliche as it is, your uniqueness is a form of strength, not weakness. So feel free to utilize it that way. Never will you ever let somebody tell you that you shouldn't look the way you do. Never will you ever allow yourself to be limited to your stereotypes. Never will you ever change yourself to fit into the mainstream, and never will I ever tell my mother to take off her favorite red jacket. I am proud to tell you my mother was born in Hong Kong, and my father was born in Singapore. My name is Sophie Kuah, first-generation Chinese Canadian, born and raised here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, tell me your name.